The 2000 election is almost here, just a few more days, but it's important for us as people of faith to be involved in the political arena throughout the year. Today on Austin Faith Dialogue, we talk with the Executive Director of Texas Impact. Stay with us for a good conversation on Austin Faith Dialogue.
Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life. A series highlighting the cultural and social interactions between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KXAN. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
We're glad you joined us today on Austin Faith Dialogue when we're talking about the importance of people of faith being involved in the political process, not just right now, right in front of the election, but throughout the year. And to help us in that conversation is Bea Moorhead, the Executive Director of Texas Impact right here in town.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So good to have you, Bea. Let me first of all, though, not assume that anybody really knows what Texas Impact is. So talk a little bit about the organization that you head.
That's a good idea. Many people are not aware of Texas Impact. Texas Impact is a statewide coalition of religious groups that are working on social justice advocacy. We have Protestants, people from ecumenical groups such as Austin Area Interreligious Ministries. We have a number of Jewish organizations, all of whom are united to work on to work for the social justice in our state.
And now, since you're involved in the political arena basically full time, where some of us only pay attention like maybe once a year, once every 4 years, perhaps you've got a really good piece of advice for people as they're facing the election in just a few days.
Well, I guess I would have two pieces of information, and one of them, unfortunately it's a little late now, is you shouldn't just be involved once every year, or once, let alone once every 4 years. You should be trying to be involved all the time. Part of the work of the church is our prophetic and teaching ministry, and we believe as people of faith that it's important not just to take care of our own spiritual needs, but that we have a role in the public arena as well. However, when people are getting ready to vote, they're not thinking about all the things they're going to do for the next 4 years. And I would say to think about, regardless of who you're choosing to vote for, just even to be mindful as you're voting that this is not just a thing that you do because you'd feel bad if you didn't go because your coworkers all have their little sticker that says I voted, or something that is a burden, or even something that is it's an activity that you're doing well because you're a member of this community, but it doesn't have anything to do with your spiritual life. It does. It's very much an outward and visible expression, right, of an inward and spiritual identity. And I think the more that we bring that awareness into our political and public activities, the more every day it becomes to bring your values and faith into your decisions.
So the political arena and the spiritual arena of a person's life really are joined.
Really, they are. That's right. The worst thing we can do is to set up this wall and say, well, I have these decisions that I make based on spiritual principles and beliefs, and these decisions that I make based on pragmatic. What we want is to have some sense of holism, that your spirituality infuses everything that you do.
Now, Texas Impact as an organization didn't come out of nowhere, I suppose. How did the organization get started?
Well, that's an interesting story, and it dates from way back before I even lived in Texas. Texas Impact started as an arm of the Texas Conference of Churches in 1973, and it was started as a response to the Sharpstown scandal. So for people who've been following our own Fred Lewis and Campaigns for People, campaign finance actually was the genesis of Texas Impact. The religious leaders involved in the Texas Conference of Churches just finally felt like they couldn't stand by and watch a complete divorce between spirituality and social justice and the way that we ran our government. So, since 1973, Texas Impact has existed in one form or another as a coalition to lobby. It is a 501c4 where I'm a lobbyist, and we exist to lobby the Texas legislature to take into account the needs of all the people of Texas, and to make, it was originally called the Interfaith Commission on Human Priorities, and the idea there was that money is not the priority, people are the priority of government. At that same time, there was an organization called National Impact, and National Impact had branches in several states, many of which continue to exist, even though the national organization doesn't anymore. And Texas Impact affiliated with National Impact and maintained that affiliation for a long time.
You said a word just a minute ago that some people will have really paid attention to, and that's the word lobbying, which conjures up all kinds of visions, as you well know, for people. So then the question, what particular slant or perspective does Texas Impact come from?
Texas Impact, when I go talk to members of the legislature, what I'm talking to them about is what is important to people of faith in Texas based on broadly held principles within the Judeo-Christian tradition. So I wouldn't go represent any one opinion as being the opinion of all Methodists or all Presbyterians. But what I do say is that this is a perspective that reflects broadly held understandings of justice and fairness and what we believe God intends for the world and for us in here in Texas, based on a broad interpretation.
For instance, then? For
instance, with respect to campaign finance reform, which is a good, especially here as we come up on the election, a good thing for people to keep in mind. Texas Impact's position is that government is for everybody, that campaigns need to be financed in a way so that anyone who wants to can participate, so that people aren't disenfranchised. One of the things that is a common complaint about our current campaign finance system, as you know, is that it promotes special interests, and that often people who are disadvantaged, are poor, or needs special health care, or have special needs, are not don't get adequately represented because they don't have the resources to put into someone's campaign to get someone elected. And so there's a social justice aspect to campaign finance reform that says that we need to run our political campaigns so that really what the majority of people want can be represented and not what could be paid for.
Right. Okay, so we might say that the value then is allowing for participation of all people.
In campaign finance reform, that's right. Allowing for participation of all people and representation of their needs. I think that would be, a common complaint would be, well, that no one cares about the needs of the poor and disadvantaged who gets elected. Well, what we would want to see is that the poor and disadvantaged have an equal voice so that someone can be elected who does care about their needs.
I see. So campaign finance reform is one issue. Then what are some of the other issues on Texas Impact's agenda?
Texas Impact's board just voted in September on a legislative agenda. In addition to campaign finance reform, there are three other main areas that my board is interested in the upcoming legislative session. One is criminal justice, both with respect to capital punishment, which we've all heard so much about this summer, but also with respect to fair defense and just the idea of fairness in the system. I think there's a lot of concern, not just with respect to death penalty cases, that people, particularly people who don't have money to hire an attorney, don't get a fair shake in the system, and that's very contrary to most understandings of justice within the Judeo-Christian tradition. Health and Human Services is always an interest of Texas Impact, particularly children's issues. This particular legislative session, we have a particular interest in Medicaid eligibility, and a lot of other people have, I'm sure, already brought this up on this program and others. But again, there's an issue of fairness that that people need access to the system, that government services exist for people. I mean, the government is for the people who live in the state, and that it needs to provide services to them so they can get them and so they know they're available. Then also environment, and that has been an issue that historically Texas Impact has not had maybe as many different issues on, but in this interim period, and actually just since January, it has bubbled up as something that's of a lot of concern to religious communities in the state. And this summer we had a really nice opportunity to work with a lot of environmental groups on not a legislative issue, but a state agency issue, asking the Texas Natural Resources Conservation Commission to direct their staff to develop a global warming plan in Texas. And it was a really nice opportunity to raise, not just for the Natural Resources Conservation Commission, but for the public in Texas, to remind everyone that environmentalism is not new to religion. It starts in Genesis, where Genesis says that everything God made was good, and I believe that people need to be stewards of all of God's good creation, and it was a really good opportunity to raise that issue across the state.
Now, I'm intrigued, and let me begin this question here before the break. We'll get to more of it after the break, but I'm intrigued with such a broad agenda and such a broad representation in the organization itself. However do you begin to have consensus?
There is, for one thing, let's see. I would say, for one thing, the reason that it's possible to have consensus is that's sort of a testimony to the fact that even though within the Christian denominations and among religions there's considerable difference of opinion, clearly there are many, many issues where there's not difference. There is a tradition of caring for poor and disenfranchised people that cuts across not just the Judeo-Christian tradition, but any world religion that I can think of off the top of my head.
So that says a lot about our common humanity.
Sure, it says a lot about our common humanity.
Okay. Well, let's continue then with that answer after the break, because there's a lot more we could talk about here. Stay with us. We'll be right back on Austin Faith Dialogue. We're glad you're here for Austin Faith Dialogue and our lively conversation about the importance of our being involved in the political process. And our guest today is Bea Moorhead, Executive Director of Texas Impact. Thanks, Bea. Now let's follow up with where you were, as I was trying to get you to talk a little bit about how you draw consensus among such a diverse membership as Impact has.
Well, and what I had told you was that one of the things that to me that this broad consensus typically says is how many public policy issues cut across the interests of faiths, even if they have disagreement on any number of other issues. But there's another answer to that question, which is much more pragmatic, and that is, well, how do I particularly find out that there's consensus? And that's, that's where I would say, for one thing, that the internet is a wonderful thing, not just for me, but for nonprofit and nonprofit advocacy in general. I think one thing is that the internet has really changed our ability to keep in contact with people who, board members who really are interested but don't always have time to be coming down all the time. And if I were talking to people, I have 52 board members, so if I were always talking to all of them on the phone, I wouldn't be doing anything. I certainly wouldn't be here. I'd still be on the phone with someone. So what I do is to raise an issue and caucus among the members. Then we have 3 meetings a year, and for instance, at the last meeting there was extensive discussion about the legislative agenda, and things were, in some cases reframed, or the board took a great deal of time to frame issues so that everyone was comfortable with the wording. But to me, I guess I would come back to my original point, which is I guess I'm still surprised that there's not more haggling about the wording of a specific issue. I mean, really, I think I'm very impressed with how strongly held these positions are, at least among church leaders who is represented on the Texas Impact Board.
A good testimony to their depth of conviction.
Oh, absolutely.
And now you mentioned the internet, so remind people what your organization's address is so they can find you.
Absolutely. Our organization's address is so easy, www.texasimpact.com. And we have a nice purple homepage and links to a lot of government and religious organizations and information on hot policy issues.
Good. So I hope you get lots of hits. Now, one thing that folks might say is, okay, it's election season, yes, right. But there are other years, there are other months. What happens in the interim? What should we be doing? What are we perhaps not doing? Right,
and what we should not be doing is going home and watching the election returns and eating popcorn and then forgetting about it for another 4 years. The reality, and I have had so many opportunities to talk with church groups all over the state about this very thing. The reality is the political process is happening all the time. There's the phenomenon of election season. There's also the phenomenon of the legislative season here in Texas, because we have a citizen legislature that meets 5 months every 2 years, and people oftentimes have the idea that that's when they say, how could it be that that our members can absorb that much information and do that much work in 5 months? Well, the answer, of course, is that they don't. They're actually working all the time. And for people of faith really to be effectively involved in the political process, they need to be working all the time too. One of the ways that they need to most be working is to be establishing relationships with their elected officials when it's not the crunch, when it's not right before the election, and it's not right when the legislative session is going on and they really are overwhelmed by all the work that they have to do and all the 2,000 plus bills that they have to go through. We have this phenomenon, the interim period from when the legislature ends in 1 year until the next time it comes back. That's the work period for people of faith and people who are not necessarily coming at it from a faith perspective, but are just interested citizens as far as that goes. That's when they need to be taking the time to go meet with those members of the legislature and say, I'm your constituent. I live in your neighborhood if it's your representative, because you really do. They live right by you. Maybe your kids go to the same school. Now is the time for you to say, here are my interests, and I want to make sure you know that I'm here, I'm watching you, and I want to participate.
So perhaps getting involved with Texas Impact would be one way to find out what some of the issues are and how to get involved. What are some other resources, organizations, websites, anything else people might pay attention to?
One of the best and least used by people of faith websites is the State of Texas website itself. It has the information that you need to find out when a committee is meeting, to find out, it has bills that you can read online. You can find out who your representatives and senators are, how to contact them. You can send them email typically. And that address is www.state.tx.us. It's just all right there. Texas Impact works in coalition with a lot of issue-specific organizations. For instance, we work with Campaigns for People on campaign finance reform. We work with the Texas Seed Coalition and other environmental organizations on environmental issues. We work with Texans Care for Children and the Center for Policy Priorities on health and human service issues. Those issue-specific organizations are very good places to go to get really good in-depth information about a specific policy issue. They don't typically focus on telling you how to get in contact with your elected representatives or how to be an advocate. That's what I see as my role, is to do that coaching part about here's where to go and here's what to say and how to know when you're supposed to go.
Somebody obviously coached you. How did you get to where you are?
Through a long and circuitous route. I went to the LBJ school, and I actually have to say, because I always tell people this, I actually have an undergraduate degree in costume design from the University of Texas and spent 4 years working in the professional theater. So that's one thing that I guess people sometimes say, like that makes sense, a checkered background. I went to the LBJ school, and immediately after I went to the LBJ school, began working for the Texas Performance Review in the controller's office for John Sharp. And that's my training. I worked there for 7 years and then had the last of my 3 children, really is the last one, and took a break. And when I was ready to go back to work, this job was open, and I said, sure, sounds like fun.
There you are, nice fit.
It's a very nice fit. I'm delighted.
Now, am I correct that individuals, not just faith organizations, but individuals can join Texas Impact?
That's true. Our organizational members are primarily the regional governing bodies of the Protestant churches. They're called the judicatories, the conferences of the Methodist Church, the presbyteries of the Presbyterian Church. Those are what we call our member organizations, and they send members to my board. However, we also have hundreds of individuals, some of whom join through those organizations, some of whom just receive my newsletter and send me their check, and what they get for that is access to additional information. In addition to just being able to get on my website, I send them emails and newsletters and other kinds of publications, and also congregations themselves oftentimes will join so that they have access to that information.
And now, Texas Impact has been in the state for 30 years.
Yes, almost 30 years.
What successes can you point to where people of faith have made a significant difference in public policy?
Well, the first most recent one that I really feel like needs to be pointed out is the recent success with the Natural Resources Conservation Commission. It's very clear that the involvement of faith throughout the state calling for stewardship of our creation here in Texas was instrumental in moving the TNRCC to direct their staff to look at the issue of global warming. I believe that we really had an impact there. And that's not legislative, but it is public policy. Going back in Texas Impact's history, the big successes, some of them have been indigent health care in the 1980s, farm worker rights. The notable failure, of course, is the lottery, which everyone worked so hard on, and still we have it. So,
well, that's the world of politics, right?
That's the world of politics.
The give and take.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And even if you don't win, in some senses, people of faith are winning by being in the process. and saying our voice is part of this. So I think it's important, even if you don't get your bill passed.
So remind us then, your phone number and your website, and then I've got another question.
Our phone number is 472-3903, and the website is www.texasimpact.com.
Good. So I want folks to be sure to be able to get in touch with you, not just right now before the election, but throughout the year.
Oh, yes.
So since we are at the election, and that tends to drive a lot of the conversation these days, again, what would you say to people of faith as they step into the voting booth in another few days? What do they need to keep in mind?
That this is it's a very meaningful public expression of their faith, and that as they make their choices, which we hope they've done before they actually step into the booth, that they are allowing themselves to understand that their faith isn't something they turn on and off, that it is and should be part of the decisions they make in their political public role.
And speculate a little bit. Where would you like to see Texas Impact in another, say, 3 or 5 years?
All over the state, in every congregation, and a very public presence in the political process. I would like to have, I'd like within 5 years to have members of the legislature calling to ask what we think instead of us having to call them and tell them.
Would we, in that case, be a model for other state public policy
We are
organizations?
already a model. We made presentation in Washington in September about our work on global warming, and yes, I would say very definitely I'd like us to show the rest of the country how people of faith really can do this political thing effectively.
Would it be fair to say then at this point that Texas Impact is not entirely Texas Impact? Maybe it's urban Texas Impact?
I think maybe that's true, but I'd like it to not be.
Okay. So you'd like people to come by
I'd like,
the office, well, call first,
sure, call first.
to join, to check out the website, and to perhaps themselves get involved in public policy, not just voting, but participating.
Yes, yes. I think people don't understand that very, very few average people bother to get involved, to call their members of the legislature, to write them letters, to go to the Capitol and testify. It seems like such an arcane process that we're not really supposed to be in.
But it's a
Go do it.
It's a good calling. Thank you, Bea, for being here today.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on Austin Faith Dialogue. We'll see you next week.